by the definition of communication, it means that we're trying to transfer a message. Every time we're trying to tell somebody something, explain something, it's basically engaging in communication. If I ask you not to communicate with a person next to you, I believe that most of you would choose the strategy of not answering to their questions, or perhaps you would look away, you would pretend that you're not hearing them, perhaps you would try to avoid their gaze, maybe you would give them a completely unintelligible or incorrect answers. And if I would ask you not to communicate, would you be really able to do that if you were in the same room? Most people think that it's possible. However, when we are in the same room with somebody else, we are communicating, and not responding to somebody does not mean that we're just not engaging. It means that we are rejecting them. Communication is something that is a survival mechanism for humans. It is a very important aspect of how we function. If we take an example of a small baby that is unable to take care of itself, it needs people to feed them, to dress them, to keep them warm, to clean them up. Baby's only means of letting somebody know that something should be done is communication. They're crying, right? They're trying to let us know that they're hungry, that they're tired, that something hurts them. And if the caregiver does not respond to the baby, what will happen in a long time? This baby will not just suffer and poor social skills. This baby will not just cry. They will not just be angry. Eventually, if this goes on for a long period of time, this baby will not be able to survive. And communication as means of survival stays with us for the rest of our lives. When people ask us questions, we reply. When we ask people questions, we expect a reply from them. And when we don't get this reply, it does not have to be a verbal reply. It can be a gaze, it can be a smile. But if we don't get that, basically we feel rejected. We feel that this person just does not want to interact with us. Let's start out by taking a look at this basic schematic representation of communication. You have two people in communication. You have one person in a blue square and the other one in a yellow square. Their communication starts when one of them needs to speak or report or convey a message, and on the other side, the other person has to wish to hear what the other has to say. Not necessarily have the need to hear, but they need to be inclined to listen to you. I'm sure that you've heard that you should leave everything that's going on in your life away from a certain situation. Perhaps when you're coming to practice, that you should put away what's happening in your private life or in school. It's very difficult to do that. I'm sure that some people would even say that it's impossible, because every time you enter a situation, there's so many factors influencing how you're going to behave. For example, your emotions. When you're sad, the communication is going to be more difficult because you will be more focused on something else. When you're in the role of leading somebody, you're going to speak more than when you are in the submissive role. Your attitudes, your experiences with the topic. If you're speaking to somebody who is less experienced, then you're going to speak probably more because you're going to try to convey this experience. How much knowledge you have on the topic, what your abilities are, how structured or good the environment is. All of this is going to influence how you're going to speak to the other person. And when you have something to convey, to tell to the other one, you can do that either verbally or non-verbally. When we're speaking about conveying information, we mainly use verbal communication, which means using words. But when we're conveying attitudes, emotions, our beliefs perhaps even, we use nonverbal communication, which means that we are using a lot of nonverbal channels, and we're going to go through that a little bit later. But what happens when I want to tell somebody something? I will encode the message that's currently more or less in my mind into something that the other person will try to decode. So I smile to somebody and they will understand this as, oh, she's happy. And they're going to encode their response and smile back at me. So this communication is basically a circle of encoding my messages, of trying to understand the other person's responses, and it's a very complex situation. There could be a lot of mistakes. For example, if you're using words that the other person cannot understand, if you're speaking in different languages, it's going to be very difficult for the other one to decode what you're saying. Or if you are very sad or very angry because of something that happened in another area of life, you should be very careful to try to explain this to the other person, because otherwise they just might feel that they are making you angry. And when we enter into communication with somebody else, we should pay attention to be clear in our communication, to make sure that we're using the knowledge of nonverbal communication properly. And first of all, if we look at the share of verbal and nonverbal communication, all theories, all research says that there's more nonverbal communication than verbal. Nonverbally, we convey about between 60 and 75% of the messages. Some theories even say that up to 90% is nonverbal. The rest is left for words. And sometimes we neglect the fact of nonverbal communication. In the educational system, we're often just referred to words. Just pay attention to what they're saying, speak clearly. But we forget about the nonverbal messages, and this is the first part that we're going to talk about right now. Nonverbally, we communicate through channels of nonverbal communication. And the first one that we meet in a person is their physical appearance and clothing. The way somebody is dressed will tell us their status, whether they're successful, how much reputation they have. If we look at sports, the typical example are team suits or team outfits. When you see somebody in a national team outfit, you will know that they're a successful athlete. Big basketball competitions need to wear suits, which gives them the appearance of being serious, being solemn, being successful coaches. Most of the time, physical appearance is a big factor when we don't know somebody. So when we're meeting the person for the first time, we expect them to look a certain way. For example, if you hire a nutritionist for consulting you with your diet, and you meet up with this person and it looks like they're very, very much overweight, are you really going to listen to them, or is there going to be a small glitch in communication? Are you going to feel somewhat off about the whole thing? And this person might be a very big expert on nutrition. However, you might feel somehow strange because they don't look the way you expect them to. Because I'm sure that if you hire a nutrition, you expect somebody to be somehow fit. You don't probably expect a very skinny person, but you probably don't expect somebody that's very much overweight. However, once we've known a person for a longer period of time, their physical appearance and clothing does not matter that much anymore. The second one is facial expressions. Through facial expressions, we convey emotions. These expressions are typical, culturally universal. If we take a look at these two faces, I'm sure that you will be able to tell that the first one is angry and the second one is happy. A lot of nonverbal communication is based on the culture that we grow up in. Facial expressions are not like that. If we take a person from a very contact culture like Italy or Portugal or perhaps Greece. These are typically older cultures where people have settled in tight groups, in tight communities, where there's been a lot of communication since forever. It grows to be a cultural phenomenon. And in these cultures, there's more communication, more nonverbal communication. However, the facial expression when somebody is angry is going to be the same as in a culture that's typically non-contact, for example, northern cultures. If we take a look at a person from north of Norway, for example, the facial expression when somebody is angry is going to be the same. The difference is only that in a contact culture, these expressions are more intense and they last longer, but the physical appearance is the same. I'm sure that if we look at these basic emotions, you'll be able to tell which are presented in which picture. For example, this one would be surprise. This one would be fear. This one would be disgust. So it's like taking a sip of coffee that you've mistakenly salted instead of sweetened. This one is anger. This one is joy or happiness. And this one is sadness. Sometimes we're trying to hide our emotions, and especially when we're trying not to hurt people, when we're trying not to show them that we're angry, we do show happiness, we do show surprise, we try to show disgust, we try to show fear, and especially we try to show our anger. And it's been considered for a long time that it's very difficult to do that. And one of the best theories explaining how emotions function is that of Paul Ekman. He started studying microfacial expressions, and he found that when there's intense anger, for example, it will appear in our face for a very brief period of time. And for that, I would like to give you a special homework, and you will browse through a few issues on microfacial expressions in a PowerPoint that will be added to the homework after you've finished looking at this video. The next nonverbal channel is posture. It shows the mood of the person at a given moment. If we look at those pictures, you'll be able to tell that A, for example, is curious, B is thinking, C is not quite sure what to do or being unable to decide about something. D is rejecting something. E observes. F is showing off or showing suspicion. And G is questioning or seeking some additional explanation. Why is it useful to understand or recognize posture? You don't have to ask the person, are you okay, if you see that they're not. If you ask somebody, are you okay? Probably they're going to say, yes, I'm okay. It's the same as when people are asking you, how do you feel? Most of us say fine, even though we may not be fine at that moment. But if we go directly, what is wrong? When we see that something's wrong, we're much more likely to get an answer. And recognizing something from the posture of a person can speed up communication. The next nonverbal channel is eye contact. If we look at people, it means that we're trying to be close to them. Probably you've heard of the expression, the eyes are the mirror to one's soul. The regular amount or time of eye contact is up to 3 or 4 seconds. More than that means that we're speaking about prolonged contact. If we look at somebody for 5 seconds, for example, it could mean either intimacy or dominance. Sometimes we make a mistake of asking people to look us in the eye while we're speaking to them. It could mean that we're being aggressive towards this person. Some people like a little bit more eye contact, some people don't. But if they're not looking at us, it does not mean that they're not actually listening. The next is physical contact and touch. It could again mean dominance or intimacy. We should pay attention to how people react to our touch. If they shy away or if they try to move away, we shouldn't force it. If we're trying to touch people and they're not enjoying it, they're going to try to get away from us. And if we're starting a business, for example, we should be very observant to how people react to touch. However, it means that in social situations, it's more or less okay to perhaps touch people on the hand, not on the shoulders, not on the upper hand, especially not on the head. So make sure that you observe how people react to your physical contact. And one more thing that we should be very careful of is social space. We can speak of 4 social spaces. The first is intimate, which is about 50 centimeters away from our eyes, as is shown in this picture. So if your eyes are here, and this is 50 centimeters, it means that you're entering the intimate social space of the person, which is reserved mainly for our partners, for our children, for our parents in the beginning of our lives. The less intense contact with people we have, the less likely it is for them to enjoy being in the intimate social space. Friends, co-workers mainly belong into the personal social space. And if you keep trying to enter into the intimate space of a person, it's going to feel that you are, again, being aggressive to this person, and they're going to try and get away from you, because when somebody's in my intimate space, I'm not able to discuss anything but wait for this person to get out of this space. I'm sure you all felt awkward when somebody has been too close to you. The way to react to this is either to sit down and create a larger social space, because if you see in this picture, from the side it's less than 50 centimeters. But if you're the one aggressing into the other person and entering their intimate space, you're going to find this out by them moving away, which means that in this case you should just stay where you are and allow the other person to set their distance to you. Again, social space is something that's reserved for acquaintances or perhaps co-workers, which are not actually our friends, and public space is something that we try to keep as much as possible when we're away, when we don't know the other person. If you take a look at how we enter buses, if we don't know people, somebody will go to the back of the bus, one will sit right next to the driver, and so on. We will try to keep as much social space between us as possible. This invasion into intimate space is still so far the best explanation of why there's so much crime in very large cities, because people keep invading other people's intimate spaces, and eventually it can lead to a higher level of aggression. We have a couple more. Gestures show the level of activation. The more we move with our hands, the more we move with our face, the more we are shifting ourselves from one place to the other, the more activated, the more upset or excited we are. But this one is based on, it's a relative nonverbal channel. So if somebody is very active, it means that they're activated when they're even more active. It's not the same with vocalization. We hear the excitement in the other person's voice. So when somebody comes home and says, "Oh, I'm fine," right, we're going to hear that they're not fine just from the tone of their voice. The level or the amount of nonverbal communication, it's safe to say that it's about 2/3 of entire communication. In the beginning, we spoke a little bit about 60%, 90%. But if you say 2/3 of all communication is nonverbal, it's going to be completely okay. One more thing that you should very much pay attention to is that the verbal and nonverbal part of the message should always be coordinated. They must give the same message. They should be synchronized. If you look at this mother saying to the child, just so you know, I'm only punishing you because I love you so much. It's a weird message, isn't it? She's punishing him, but she's saying that she loves him. It's called a double-blind communication. It's sometimes found in people with schizophrenia. It means that it's hard to understand what's actually the truth, right? Somebody's telling us something and showing something completely else. It's like a coach after a competition saying, oh, it was okay, right? It wasn't okay. We hear it in the voice, but they're trying to disguise it somehow. So an important aspect of communication is also the synchronization of the verbal and nonverbal part of the message. So we come to the end of this section on verbal and nonverbal communication. Some additional work is coming up. One thing is going to be that you'll read through the PowerPoint on microfacial expressions and answer the questions that are inside this PowerPoint. Then you'll take a trip to the library and read through Michael Argyle's book on bodily communication. Just browse through it, take a look at a couple of interesting facts that are shown inside, and afterwards solve the quiz. The quiz is going to be also on the platform. It's mainly going to be about the things that are explained in this video, but some of the things could also be found in Michael Argyle's book. So enjoy the reading, and we'll continue with the next chapter once you're done with the first part. Bye-bye.